now is Republican presidential candidate, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. Good evening, Governor. Thanks for being with us. I mean, you heard the president say, first of all, if you were the president, what would you have told the American people different from what this president did?
Well, I would have been telling the American people something different for the past 7 years. I would have identified clearly that we are at war with radical Islam. That's who we're fighting, and we have to take the fight directly to them. We've heard people say, well, it's better to fight them there than here. We're fighting them here. They are here. That's what happened in San Bernardino. It may not be ISIS, but it's radical Islam. And we saw it in Fort Hood. We saw it in Little Rock. We saw it at Boston. And finally, the president at least makes an attempt to acknowledge, ever so faintly, but at least acknowledge that this was Islamic terrorism. But he still wants to try to make excuses and remind us.
I don't even know if he said Islamic terrorism. He said it was an act of terrorism, and then he talks about going along some perverted form of Islam. But, you know, everything he said, Governor, we're taking out the heavy weapons, we continue to train forces. You know that we spent $500 million to train four people in Syria. How can he stand in front of the American people and beat his chest about this?
And we've flown air missions, but we didn't drop the ordinances because we had such tight rules of engagement. We need to understand that we're dealing with an enemy that is like, and I've called this, he used the exact metaphor, a cancer. And I've said when you have a malignant cancer, you don't try to just take care of the area around it. You eradicate that cancer. Then you radiate around it so it doesn't come back. That's how we have to deal with ISIS.
You would send troops?
If necessary, absolutely. I've heard people say no ground troops. Why do we limit ourselves? And why on God's earth, if we were going to limit ourselves, would we ever announce to our enemies that we have limitations and we have a line we're not going to cross?
Were you surprised, Governor, that this president did not even discuss, given the fact that these guys seem to be under the radar, you know, any of the problems as it relates to metadata and the collection, encryption, any of the stuff that apparently is what's being used to radicalize these people?
Well, and one of the great ironies, even at the time when he's saying we need to bring Syrian refugees here, and a lot of people are saying, wait a minute, we don't have a good process of vetting them. He says, oh, don't worry, we thoroughly vet them. The female shooter was thoroughly vetted, more so than most of the Syrian refugees are going to be, and is you know, Dr. Phil would say, how'd that work out for you? It didn't work out for us very well. So I don't think any American has a great deal of confidence in the so-called vetting process. And one of the things he talked about tonight that I found extremely crazy was this idea that, well, we will run the same kind of background checks, and if you're not on the no-fly list, or if you're on the no-fly list, you don't get a gun. These people could have purchased a gun. They weren't on the no-fly list. She had a passport. She had a visa. And the interesting thing, did you know who was on the no-fly list that wouldn't have been able to buy a gun? Who? The late Senator Ted Kennedy got on the no-fly list.
Right.
Catherine Stevens, the wife of the late Senator Ted Stevens. Why? Because sometimes she went by the name Cat Stevens. Cat Stevens, who converted to Islam.
Right.
And even he really shouldn't have been on the list.
But you know, Governor, when we listen to the president, and he seemed to spend more time about how we can't treat Muslim Americans any differently, as though there was some huge backlash against Muslim Americans. This country, since 9/11, has been incredibly open and allowing Muslims to come in just like everybody else. And the president and his attorney general, with this shocking, my greatest fear is when, you know, rhetoric is going to approach action.
Well, I wonder if she saw the front page of the New York Daily News last week, and if she's going to go out and tell them that they can't say nasty things about Christians. Look, I don't know anybody. Maybe there are people out there, but I don't personally know people who blame all the Muslims in the world for Muslims. But I don't know anybody with a brain that can't identify that when people follow jihad, when they believe that their duty to God on this earth is to kill everybody that does not accept their caliphate, I don't know why this president can't say, folks, these are our enemy. They want to take us to the 7th century. They want to take us completely off the radar screen, and we're not going to tolerate it, and we're going to eradicate them before they have the opportunity to keep killing us.
Well, and, you know, Governor, given what happened in San Bernardino and the fact that, you know, they are here to do this, I mean, the president is so concerned about how they became radicalized. Is that as important as finding out who they are?
Well, it's only important to realize that social media has given an opportunity.
But we already know that.
And maybe we need to do a better job of infiltrating and shutting down access of social media to people who are looking and beginning to communicate in ways that, frankly, I don't know why any American company would give a voice and a platform to people who are talking about murdering Americans.
And, you know, one of the things they argue is that it gives them the ability, it gives law enforcement the ability to monitor it, and yet at the same time, we don't, Jim Comey has said we don't have the opportunity, the resources, or the people to monitor it.
We certainly need to have a system in place that follows the constitutional protections so that people don't have their rights infringed upon. There's got to be probable cause, but once you have it, then use it for heaven's sakes and go after the people that you suspect. Don't make the haystack so big it's harder to find the needle. But if you think there's a needle in there, get the magnets out and go find the needle and pull it out of there.
All right, Governor Mike Huckabee, thank you so much for being with us.